So today is going to be all about sound tuning and exactly what it is and how you can use it when you're tuning your bow. So let's roll the intro and get to the video. So sound tuning is basically using the sound and optimizing the tune of your bow by using the sound to get the quietest sound on release and the one with the least vibration, the least noise, the least harshness on release. And there are two main things that you can tune with sound tuning really, and that is the brace height and the tiller. So these are the two main things, and first I want to look at the tiller. So when it comes to tiller, there's actually quite a lot of confusion around this, and it's a little bit of a dark art when it comes to tuning this part of your bow, because it's very hard to pin down a tiller that's good, because when you change your tiller, you change your knocking point height, so then you have to readjust your knocking point height. It's very hard to do some fine tuning with your tiller, and actually using sound tuning for your tiller is the best way I've found to get this right. And also this is the way that Win & Win actually recommends to get the correct tiller for your bow, and that is by doing sound tuning. So what I want to demonstrate and explain is how you do this sound tuning and what you're looking for and how you make sure that you get the right tiller for your setup. So effectively, when you change the tiller of a bow, when you use the limb bolts and you change the tiller, what you're doing here is you're adjusting this setup for the specific pair of limbs that you've got, because any two limbs will be slightly different in maybe the way they draw back, the exact poundage might be a tiny bit different, the exact way they come forwards and hit, and the string kind of hits them as you release. So all these things will be slightly different, and by doing the tiller and adjusting it, you're basically adjusting your bow for this. I kind of like to think of tiller as similar to the cam timing on a compound. Obviously with a compound, as you draw back, you can see the cams rolling around and you can visually check this. With a recurve on release, it's obviously very hard to see the timing of the limb, and both do go forwards at the same time. But I like to think of tiller as basically balancing the limbs in a similar way, in kind of an analogy to this. So that's how I think of tiller, and it's important to remember and realize that when you're adjusting your tiller, it is specific to the individual bow and limb combination that you have. And I don't just mean, that model or that manufacturer, I mean those two exact pairs of equipment. So for instance, if I have, at the moment I shoot a Win & Win ATF, if I have that riser with some Weir-Wis limbs and I set the tiller, that's great. If I then get another riser that's exactly the same, and another pair of limbs that's exactly the same model, same poundage, same everything, same length, the tiller that I set that bow to won't necessarily be the same, because the tiller is tuning the overall combination of your whole setup to get the most efficient point. And it differs for different risers just because of slight differences when they're made, or a tiny bit of difference in the limb because of how fast that specific limb is. Maybe the poundage is a tiny bit different, maybe the draw force curve is a tiny bit different. So this is why the tiller has to be set specific to the exact setup that you've got there. Now for brace height, this is basically the same thing, but it's generally a bit more simple because you have less variables in terms of, you don't need to change one tiller and the other and then change your knocking point and find that. By the time you do your brace height, you've done the tiller, you've done the knocking point, you've done all these things, and you're just checking and fine tuning. So with the brace height, again, it's specific to the setup of the bow you've got in terms of that specific riser, that specific pair of limbs, that specific stabilizer setup, and so on. So brace height is done in the same way, but now what I want to explain a bit more about is exactly how you would do this sound tuning and how you would go about in a logical process and do this. So let's say you've got a bow and you want to find, first of all, the correct tiller, because it should be somewhere maybe between 0 to 6 millimeters, and you want to find what the correct tiller is. And then once you've done that, you're going to do your general tuning, and then you're going to do some brace height tuning using the sound again. So what would you do for this? The first thing you would do is to do your sound tuning with the tiller, and do this at least 18 meters. This is the most common mistake I see people doing, and that's trying to do sound tuning at close range blank boss, and it's incredibly hard to identify the difference between the sound of the bow and the sound of the arrow hitting the target, and then you get all kinds of reverb as well. So definitely do sound tuning at least 18 meters so you can differentiate between the sound of the bow and the sound of the target and the arrow hitting the target. Also, another thing which is kind of obvious when you think about it, but I've done the same mistake before, is when you're doing your sound tuning, always do it in the same place. Even in the same location, obviously, in the same venue is good, but in the same place in the room. Because if you move, closer to walls, closer to other things, because it's a sound test, it can change the sound dramatically. And it's also important, if you can, to get someone else to listen, maybe another archer or a coach or whatever, to listen to the sound and check and make sure that you both agree on the sound being better with a certain setup, rather than it just being one person, just as a double check basically. So that's another key thing to do. So when it comes to the tiller, what you would basically do is you would make sure you've warmed up, obviously. You would shoot a few arrows at blank boss, just to make sure you're warmed up, your equipment's settled in, the limbs have settled in, and then you basically shoot at 18 meters, listen to the sound of the bow, and then simply say you start with a 0mm tiller. So that means the distance between the limb and the string here is the same as the distance between the bottom limb and the string here. If you start with a 0mm tiller, shoot that at 18 meters, listen to the sound. Then adjust the tiller, maybe go to 2mm. So what that means, if it's a 2mm tiller, is the distance here between the string and the top limb is 2mm larger than the distance between the string and the top limb and the bottom limb, here. So a 2mm tiller means the top is 2mm bigger than the bottom. So that's very easy to remember. But you would then do this 2mm tiller, check it at 18 meters again, listen to the sound, and check, is it better? Is it louder? Is it more silent? Is there more hum, more vibration? Listen to what it does. Then go to 4mm, do the same. Then go to 6mm, do the same. Then go to 8mm, do the same. And then go back and check. And you'll find somewhere in the range, there's a tiller that for this specific bow and this specific combination is quietest for your setup. And that is the tiller that you should go with. And as I said before, this is the method that Win & Win recommends in order to set your tiller. And it's different for different bows. Like I said, this setup might have a 2mm tiller. I might get another pair of limbs, and when I set it up, I might find that it needs a 4mm tiller, or maybe a 3mm tiller. Don't get hung up on the exact tiller should be the same for every combination, but it's specific to the bow and the exact setup that you've got. So I really want to make sure that that we're clear on that basically. So when it comes to the brace height, when you put your twist in your string, in order to change the brace height, you might end up having to put quite a few twists in your string to change it enough to actually have a meaningful test. And then maybe you find a brace height that's good, but your string has now got 70 twists in it or something, which is far too many. So what you might actually need to do is you find the correct brace height you want, and then you might need to make another string that's maybe longer or maybe shorter in order to get the correct brace height with the correct number of twists in your string. So it's normally recommended to have somewhere between 15 to 30 twists in your string, and to basically try and stick within that range to get your brace height. But obviously if you've done this and you've got too many twists, then you might need to make a shorter string. So a very rough rule of thumb is if you find out that you at the correct number of twists, at 30 twists, if you find out that your string is 5mm too high a brace height, in terms of you want to make the brace height lower, then you know that it's 5mm too high. And a very rough rule of thumb is you can then just make the string 5mm longer to lower that brace height. So however much you want to move your brace height for, if you want to move it 3mm, 5mm, then you can change the length of your string by that amount in obviously the correct direction. This is a very rough rule of thumb, but it does work quite well. And obviously the bigger the amount, the kind of further it skews away. So if you're talking about 12mm or something, then it does start to vary a bit. But if it's for a few millimeters, 3 to 5mm, 7mm, you can use it as a rough rule of thumb, and it can save you making 3-4 strings before you get the right length. So it's really handy to do that. So that's been a guide on sound tuning and exactly what it is and how you can use it, and how specifically you can set up your tiller and brace height with sound tuning. I hope you found that video useful. As always, be sure to smash that like button and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As always, I'll put the links to social media down below, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.